Imagine opening your phone, right, and seeing the President of the United States posting an AI-generated image of himself as Jesus.
Yeah, right after threatening the actual Pope.
Exactly. I mean, all while a catastrophic war is just raging in the Middle East. It sounds like a dystopian novel, but it is Thursday, May 7th, 2026, and this is the reality we're waking up to today.
It really is. It's just wild.
It is. We are watching an unprecedented collision for you. And it's not just militaries, right? It's spiritual authority, diplomatic norms, and the very fabric of how information is even constructed.
Yeah, it is the absolute definition of a systemic multi-front rupture. You have this massive geopolitical conflict that has somehow morphed into a theological debate.
And really a war over the dictionary itself.
Oh, absolutely.
And that is exactly what we are getting into today. Welcome to this deep dive. To understand how we got here and, what's actually happening behind all these headlines, we are pulling from a really fascinating stack of sources for you today.
A very heavy stack.
Yeah, heavy is the right word.
Yeah.
We have a comprehensive Wikipedia breakdown detailing this massive historic rift between the U.S. government and the Holy See. We also have a dense but super revealing academic paper from RSIS International.
Right, the one on how global media is framing the 2026 U.S.-Israel war with Iran.
Exactly. And on top of that, we are integrating live breaking news updates from The Guardian, America Magazine, and The Times of India. So our mission today is to untangle how military conflict, religious authority, and, media manipulation are all just colliding in real time.
But before we dive in, I do need to explicitly lay out the ground rules for today's analysis.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
Because the sources you provided, they contain highly politically charged content. I mean, they represent conflicting geopolitical, national, and religious viewpoints. So our role here is to impartially report on the content provided.
Right, just the facts of the sources.
Exactly. We are not endorsing any left-wing, right-wing, or specific national viewpoints at all. We're simply unpacking the ideas, the events, and the facts contained within the original source material.
Just to help you, the listener, understand the mechanics of this incredibly complex situation.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand the breaking news of today, we really have to look at the buildup. This isn't just a sudden disagreement, it's a huge historical anomaly.
Right, it didn't just happen overnight.
No, not at all. Let's start with the Vatican. So in May 2025, Pope Leo XIV is elected. He is the very first American pope.
Which was a massive deal.
Huge. And initially, it was a honeymoon period. The U.S. leadership, President Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance, they are thrilled. I mean, it was celebrated as this great point of national pride.
That warmth dissipated incredibly fast.
Yeah.
I mean, prior to his papacy, Leo wasn't really known for political confrontation. He was generally seen as a moderate.
Right.
But the policy shifts of the second Trump administration really forced a change in that posture. Friction began building almost immediately over U.S. immigration policies.
Yeah, you had the administration ending birthright citizenship via Executive Order 14160.
It's exactly.
Yeah.
And executing highly controversial ICE actions, like Operation Metro Surge in Minneapolis, which tragically resulted in the deaths of 2 civilian protesters.
And that's when the Pope, along with prominent U.S. Catholic cardinals, began vocally criticizing these actions.
Yeah, and it wasn't just domestic policy causing the rift.
Right. We also see Trump pushing this heavy expansionist rhetoric in early 2026. The sources note he was floating the use of military or economic force to acquire Greenland.
Yeah, and suggesting aggressive military actions regarding Panama and Venezuela.
Which is wild.
Yeah.
And U.S. Catholic cardinals, like Cardinal Cupich, publicly condemned this. They stated that military action cannot be a normal instrument of national policy. Pope Leo himself came out and said, war is back in vogue and a zeal for war is spreading.
Which brings us to a severe escalation in January 2026. Tensions had built to the point where the U.S. Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, Elbridge Colby, summoned the Holy See's ambassador to the U.S.
Right, the French Cardinal Christophe Pierre.
Yes, summoned him to a closed-door meeting at the Pentagon.
And according to reports from the Free Press and the Financial Times, this was less of a diplomatic chat and way more of an ultimatum.
Oh, absolutely.
U.S. officials allegedly told the Vatican ambassador that the U.S. has the military power to do whatever it wants and the church had better take its side. And this is the part that really stops you in your tracks. An official allegedly invoked the Avignon papacy during this meeting.
Yeah, that is a huge detail.
It sounds like a thinly veiled threat from a mafia movie, right? For anyone who needs a quick history refresher, the Avignon papacy refers to a period in the 1300s. The French crown essentially used military and political force to subjugate the Catholic Church.
Literally forcing the popes to live in France as puppets of the state.
Exactly. It's the ultimate historical insult to the independence of the Church. So, just how unprecedented is a threat like this in modern U.S. Vatican diplomacy?
It is entirely unprecedented. I mean, if you look at the historical analysis in our Wikipedia source, scholars have to reach back centuries for a parallel. Miles Pattenden, who is an academic cited in the source, he compared this clash to Napoleon Bonaparte subjugating Pope Pius VII.
Oh, Napoleon.
Right. And this historical callback matters deeply because of its mechanics. When a superpower abandons modern diplomatic protocols to invoke medieval instances of physically capturing the church, it signals a total structural breakdown.
You're just not operating in a world of treaties anymore.
Exactly. You were operating in a world of raw, unfiltered coercion. It completely destabilized the diplomatic guardrails right on the eve of a major global conflict.
Because it really wasn't long before that conflict erupted. The timeline is super crucial here. That Pentagon meeting was in January. And then on February 28th, 2026, the U.S. and Israel began a massive military campaign against Iran.
Right. And because the diplomatic guardrails had already been completely destroyed, this war just poured gasoline on the U.S.-Vatican rift.
Oh, for sure. And here's where you see a really distinct shift. The administration realized they couldn't just brush the Pope aside, so they started trying to compete with him on his own turf.
They pivoted to theology.
Yes. You have U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth repeatedly framing the war effort as, quote, divinely ordained.
Exactly. And Pope Leo used his global platform to reject that premise entirely. On Palm Sunday, Leo quoted the biblical book of Isaiah, saying, your hands are full of blood.
Wow.
And he explicitly declared that God does not listen to the prayers of those who wage war.
Which naturally triggered a massive real-world retaliation from the U.S. administration. Trump took to Truth Social and just unleashed. He demanded the Pope stop criticizing U.S. policy.
He called the Pope weak on crime.
Yeah, weak on crime and terrible for foreign policy. He even suggested Pope Leo's election was illegitimate, that he was just installed by the Catholic Church as a liberal counterweight to Trump. And this is exactly where he posted that AI-generated image of himself as Jesus.
It's just surreal.
It is. He also falsely claimed that the Pope supports Iran having a nuclear weapon, which our sources make incredibly clear is totally false. Leo has been explicitly calling for a world free of the nuclear threat.
Right. But it wasn't just social media noise either.
No, Trump actually cut federal funding to Catholic charities of the Archdiocese of Miami. He shut down a program that assisted undocumented children. And the hostility even spilled into the public with a fake bomb threat targeting the Illinois home of the Pope's brother.
The mechanics of this are so fascinating to me because of how the administration's Catholic politicians responded.
Yeah, wait, how are Catholic politicians within the administration navigating a president calling the Pope illegitimate?
Well, Vice President J.D. Vance actually stepped in to actively argue with the Pope's theology. Vance pushed back, arguing that the Pope should be careful when discussing theological matters.
Wow.
Yeah, and he stated that, quote, sometimes war is good. He specifically cited the Allied liberation of Nazi concentration camps in World War II as his primary example.
Which is such a massive pivot. I mean, you have the vice president attempting to publicly school the Pope on Catholic doctrine. They're essentially trying to out-theologize the head of the church.
Well, they had to. They are invoking the classic just war doctrine. For centuries, the Church has held that a war can only be considered just if it meets strict criteria.
Right, like last resort kind of things.
Exactly. It must be a last resort, it must have a legitimate authority, and the use of arms must not produce evils graver than the evil to be eliminated.
Okay, makes sense.
So by citing World War II, Vance is trying to map the U.S.-Iran conflict onto the ultimate historical example of a just war, right? He's trying to maintain moral legitimacy among Catholic voters. The geopolitical war was failing to win the Pope's blessing, so the state just tried to hijack the theological justification.
The Pope didn't back down. And this creates a fascinating cause and effect chain. Because the state could not secure the moral high ground from religious authorities, they had to resort to controlling how the war was presented to the public.
Right. If you can't win the theological debate, you manipulate the information.
Exactly. So the public doesn't even question it. And if you're listening to this and thinking, how did a diplomatic dispute turn into a battle over media grammar? You really aren't alone.
No, it's a jarring shift.
It is. And this brings us to a devastating event detailed in the RSIS International Academic Paper, the Minab school bombing. A U.S. Tomahawk cruise missile hit an Iranian elementary school, killing over 175 people, almost all of them young girls.
It's awful. And the paper conducts a really thorough critical discourse analysis of how different media outlets framed that exact tragedy. The contrast is incredibly stark.
Yeah.
Western media heavily relied on the passive voice. You had headlines in major outlets reading things like, analysis suggests school was hit. The language focused on the school's proximity to a military base, using phrases like, deaths occurred.
Right.
The grammatical structure actively hides the perpetrators of the strike.
To really understand how insidious this is, we have to look at how our brains process language. It's the difference between a news report saying a driver hit a pedestrian versus a pedestrian was struck.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Right. One assigns blame and the other makes it sound like a natural disaster. When you read an active sentence, your brain instantly assigns agency. There's an actor, an action, and a victim.
The moral equation is clear.
Exactly. But when you read a passive sentence like deaths occurred, your brain files it away differently. It completely removes the moral culpability. Meanwhile, Middle Eastern media used active voice and highly graphic details to highlight the human cost.
They framed the U.S. and Israel as aggressive violators of international law.
Right. But looking at this, it's easy to assume this passive voice is just a byproduct of lazy editing. Like, is this passive voice a deliberate, sinister conspiracy? Or just editors lazily following standard risk-averse style guides to avoid getting sued?
What's fascinating here is the academic source disproves the lazy editor theory entirely using Herman and Chomsky's propaganda model.
Oh.
To understand this model, think of a massive multi-stage water filtration system. The raw, messy truth of a missile strike is the unpurified water.
Right.
Before that water ever reaches the tap, which is the headline you read on your phone, it has to pass through several dense filters. These filters are corporate ownership, advertising revenue dependencies, and most importantly, state coercion.
Wow.
The truth is stripped of its active agents and moral weight as it passes through these filters.
And the sources show us exactly what those state coercion filters look like in real time. It is incredibly heavy-handed. In the U.S., you have FCC Chairman Brendan Carr threatening to pull U.S. broadcast licenses for airing what he deems fake news about the war.
Yeah.
You have President Trump threatening treason charges against news organizations. In Israel, the military implemented strict censorship on journalists regarding the exact locations of impact.
And in Iran, the government cut the national internet and actively arrested citizens who shared photos of the strikes.
It's coming from all sides. So when an editor writes school is hit, they aren't just being lazy. They are navigating a complete gauntlet of state pressure.
Exactly. The media isn't merely reporting the war. Under immense state coercion, they are actively shaping the boundaries of the public's reality.
So, we have a complete diplomatic breakdown rooted in medieval threats, a fierce theological battle over the justification of war, and a heavily filtered, manipulated media ecosystem.
It's a lot.
It is a lot. How does this all crash into the reality of today? Let's look at the live breaking news for today, May 7th, 2026. Right now, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is at the Vatican. He just finished a 45-minute private audience with Pope Leo in an attempt to mend fences.
Yes, and the symbolism of that meeting is super rich. They exchanged gifts, right? Rubio gave the Pope a baseball paperweight, acknowledging the Pope's love for the Chicago White Sox.
Nice touch.
Right. While Pope Leo gave Rubio an olive wood pen, pointedly noting that the olive is a plant of peace. It's a highly choreographed diplomatic dance aimed at just cooling the temperature.
Right. But simultaneously, we have Trump teasing the press, saying a peace deal with Iran is very possible, though in the exact same breath, he threatened to bomb the hell out of them if they don't agree.
Classic mixed messaging.
Totally. And Iran's parliament spokesperson is downplaying this entirely, calling the U.S. peace proposal an American wish list and saying it's not a reality. Plus, Iran just rejected a U.S.-backed draft resolution at the UN Security Council regarding freedom of navigation.
Which brings us to the actual turning point.
Right. Here is the piece of news that actually explains why everyone is suddenly rushing to the negotiating table. The U.S. just abruptly halted Project Freedom.
And Project Freedom was supposed to be a massive U.S.-led military operation to forcibly guide commercial ships through the Strait of Hormuz, breaking the Iranian blockade.
But NBC is reporting that the halt happened because Saudi Arabia flat out refused to allow the U.S. to use its military bases or its airspace for the operation. Yeah. Without Saudi airspace, the U.S. simply cannot execute the mission safely. And because that mission failed to launch, there are currently 1,500 commercial ships trapped in the Strait of Hormuz.
And to understand the gravity of that, we have to look at the mechanics of the strait.
Right.
It is one of the world's most critical maritime choke points.
Right.
Roughly a fifth of the world's total oil consumption passes through that narrow waterway. When 1,500 ships are trapped there, you aren't just looking at a local traffic jam. You are looking at a cascading failure of the entire global economy.
Which brings me to a massive realization. Despite the lofty moral arguments happening in the Pope's private library, and despite the highly engineered media narratives, money talks.
Always.
Like, is the crushing economic weight of 1,500 trapped ships, a looming global fuel crisis, and soaring energy prices, is that what is actually forcing these sudden peace talks rather than any diplomatic breakthrough?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, absolutely, undeniably. The economic chokehold is tightening on all sides. Just today, the U.S. Treasury sanctioned Iraq's deputy oil minister for allegedly diverting oil to benefit Iran.
Wow, okay.
Global energy markets are shaking. Oil giants are making billions in wartime profits, while everyday consumers face a devastating winter gas crunch.
Right.
The rhetoric from Washington and Tehran is completely saturated in moral and religious justification. But the actual mechanics forcing them to the diplomatic table are the 20,000 crewmen stuck on ships and a global supply chain grinding to an absolute halt. The theology and the media spin are just the wrapping paper. The actual box is economics.
It is incredible to step back and look at this entire stack of sources. Thank you for taking this journey with us. To you, our listener, we've traced how a single complex conflict ripples outward in ways you would just never expect.
Yeah, wild.
It stretches from a closed-door diplomatic meeting invoking the 1300s to a vice president debating the theology of World War II to the tragic reality of an elementary school bombing in Manab. And we've seen how that reality is actively filtered and softened into the passive voice language we consume in our morning news feeds, all while the global economy buckles under the weight of 1,500 trapped ships.
And that actually brings us to a final thought for you to ponder. We started this deep dive by talking about how the lines of this conflict are invisible. But what happens when the very instruments we use to measure reality are themselves tampered with?
Oh, that's a good question.
Right. As AI-generated imagery and state-censored passive voice journalism increasingly blur the lines of reality, how will future historians ever be able to accurately reconstruct the truth of this era? If the primary sources, the photos, the news reports, the official statements, are deliberately engineered to hide the actors and manipulate our emotions, perhaps the real casualty of this conflict isn't just diplomatic